Shalom and welcome to the Hebrew of Israel. Today's episode is Sheba, son of Joktan. But before we get too deep into the video, first I want to tell you guys about my social media platforms. So I have a Clubhouse account and we can actually talk to one another on it. I also host Clubhouse rooms every now and then where I might talk about history and genetics of the Middle East and Africa. I have a Twitter page, a Facebook account, and a Facebook page, as well as a Instagram, all titled The Hebrew of Israel. And what I typically do on these platforms is post upcoming videos as well as slides for my presentations. And so just be on the lookout for all of that on my social media platforms. And if you want to support me financially for the channel, you can look at my Patreon as well as my PayPal and my GoFundMe. And with all of that out of the way, let's begin with the video. Sheba, son of Joktan. So who is Sheba and who are Sheba's descendants? According to Genesis chapter 10, verse 24 through 30, Eber begot Joktan and Joktan begot Sheba. The terms Joktanites and Joktani refer to Arabs who originate from South Arabia. All Yemeni tribes trace their ancestry back to this Saba, either through Hamir or Kalan, his two sons. The Sabaeans. The Sabaeans were an ancient people of South Arabia. They spoke the Sabaean language, one of the old South Arabian languages. They founded the kingdom of Saba, which was believed to be the biblical land of Sheba, and the oldest and most important of the South Arabian kingdoms. This is from Britannia. Saba, biblical Sheba, kingdom in pre-Islamic Southwest Arabia, frequently mentioned in the Bible, notably in the story of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, and various sites cited by ancient Assyrian, Greek, and Roman writers from about the 8th century BC to about the 5th century AD. The Sabaeans were a Semitic people who, at unknown date, entered South Arabia from the north, imposing their Semitic culture on an aboriginal population. Excavations in central Yemen suggest that the Sabaean civilization began as early as the 10th through 12th century BC. By the 7th through 5th century BC, besides kings of Saba, there were individuals styling themselves Marukbibs of Saba, excuse me for my pronunciation, who apparently either were high priests, princes, or exercised some function parallel to the kingly function. Saba was rich in spices and agriculture products and carried on a wealth of trade by overland cavern and by sea. For centuries it controlled Bab el-Mandeb, the straits leading into the Red Sea, and it established many colonies on the African shores. That Abyssinia, Ethiopia, was peopled from South Arabia is proved linguistically, but the difference between the Sabaean and Ethiopian languages is such as to imply that the settlement was very early and that there were many centuries of separation during which the Abyssinians were exposed to foreign influences. New colonies, however, seem occasional to have followed, and some parts of the African coast were under the suzerainty of the Sabaean kings as late as the 1st century BC. So Sabaean people, still from Britannia, Sabaean, member of a people of South Arabia in pre-Islamic times, founders of the kingdom of Saba, the biblical Sheba. So Kingdom of Saba from World History Encyclopedia. Saba, also given as Sheba, was a kingdom in southern Arabia, region of modern-day Yemen, which flourished between the 8th century BCE and 275 CE, when it was conquered by the neighboring Himyarites. The story then appears in the Ethiopian Khyber Nagast, which adds to it by having Solomon seduce the queen who gave birth to a son who later transported the Ark of the Covenant from Jerusalem to Ethiopia. The identification of the Queen of Sheba with the Kingdom of Saba has led some to conclude that she was an Ethiopian queen from Central Africa, since there was a Saba in Africa, which seems linguistically or at least culturally associated with the kingdom in Arabia. So this is from Encyclopedia Britannica 1911, Sabaeans. It says Sabaeans, the ancient name of the people of Yemen, was Saba, and the oldest notice of them are in the Hebrew scriptures. The list of the sons of Joktan in Genesis 26 through 29 contains in genealogical form a record of peoples of South Arabia, which must rest on good information from Yemen itself. So the Baran Temple, the Temple of Baran, is a Sabaean temple near Mareb, Yemen, also known as Throne of Beliscus. The Barash Beliscus, which dates back to the 10th century BCE, harbors evidence that Queen Beliscus once actually lived. And forgive me for my pronunciations. What is known today as the Beliscus Temple is mentioned in ancient Sabaean inscriptions at Baran Temple, the home of the goddess Al-Qam, which is a moon goddess. The inscription also mentions Damat, Hamim, sun, and Athir, blossom, located some 600 meters west of the Awan Temple. It is associated with the Queen Beliscus, Queen of Sheba, mentioned in the Bible. Mereb is mentioned in holy books as the capital of the Kingdom of Saba, the birthplace of 3,000-year-old civilization that left behind significant ancient ruins. The most famous of this is the throne of Queen Beliscus. The results of the German expedition showed that the temple went through two historical stages, the first stage extending from the 2nd millennium BCE to the beginning of the 1st millennium BCE, and the second stage starting from 850 BCE to the end of the Sabaean dynasty. Professor of History and Civilization at Siena University, Abu al-Garith, said that the temple is considered to be the largest temple in Yemen before Islam, and it was a temple for worshiping the moon, the main god of the Sabaeans. The nearby Awan Temple, also dedicated to the moon god Al-Qawam, located some 600 meters east of Baran Temple. It is one of the most famous monuments of the ancient kingdom of Saba, dating back to the 1st millennium BCE. Mareb, Yemen, virtually all modern scholars agree that Sheba was the South Arabian kingdom of Saba, centered around the oasis of Mareb in present-day Yemen. So here is the location where the Sabaean kingdom would have been. Basically, as they said, southern Arabia and Yemen. And so here is an excerpt from a book on the Himyaritic inscriptions lately brought to England from southern Arabia. And it says the Himyaritic is the language which precedes the modern Arabic in that portion of the Arabian Peninsula, now known as Yemen or Arabia Felix. During the first part of the lengthy period, the government of Arabia Felix was shared by other princes of the same family, and the nation was then known to foreigners as the Sabaeans, from the fact of their descent from the great father of their race, Saba or Sheba, the son of Joktan. So basically, what I'm reiterating over and over again is that when it comes to Sheba, son of Joktan, it seems like his descendants, his earliest descendants, would be the Sabaeans, again, from Sheba, son of Joktan. So Himir, who also say to descend from Saba. Himir, originally an important tribe of the ancient Sabaean kingdom of southwestern Arabia, later the powerful rulers of much of southern Arabia, from about 115 BC to about AD 525. The Himyarites were concentrated in the area known as Doeb Randem on the coast of present-day Yemen. They were probably aided in the overthrow of their Sabaean kinsmen by the discovery of a sea route from Egypt to India, which prevented the inland Sabaean kingdom of its former importance as a center for overland trade. The Himyarites, classical Hammurati, inherited the Sabaean language and culture, and from their capital at Zafar, their power at times extended eastward as far as the Persian Gulf and northward unto the Arabian desert. At the beginning of the 4th century AD, the Mir capital was moved northward to Syria, and later to the century and later in that century both Christianity and Judaism gained firm footholds in the area. Their control over the production of frankincense and myrrh, non-Yemeni luxury commodities as various spices and condiments from southern Asia, and ostrich plumes and ivory from eastern Africa. The three most famous and largest of these empires were the Mandaean, the Sabaean, and the Himyarite, all of which were known throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. Their periods of ascendancy overlapped somewhat, extending from roughly 1200 BCE to 525 CE. So here is the Himyarite kingdom, again situated in southern Arabia and Yemen. So the descendants of Joktan, son of Sheba, are likely the Sabaeans, ancient southern Arabians. Their kingdom was literally called Saba. So who are the descendants of the Sabaeans today? One of the greatest tools we can use is language and archaeology. In a linguistic sense, we do see the movement of Southern Arabian Semitic languages into Ethiopia. Same goes for archaeology. We see similar Sabaean style architecture in Ethiopia as well. So Sabaean, also known as Sabic, was an Aksumite language spoken in the kingdom of Aksum, present-day Yemen, Eritrea, northern Ethiopia, Tigray, and Afar, between 1000 BC and the 6th century AD by the Sabaeans. The Sabaean language belongs to the Southern Arabian and Habesha Semitic branch of the Afro-Asiatic family. And so when it comes to the Bayesian phylogenetic analysis of Semitic languages, which identifies early Bronze Age origin of Semitic in the Near East, it actually talks about how Semitic languages migrated into the Horn of Africa. It says, the evolution of languages provides a unique opportunity to study human population history. The origin of Semitic and the nature of dispersals by Semitic-speaking populations are of great importance to our understanding of the ancient history of the Middle East and the Horn of Africa. Our statistical tests of alternative Semitic histories support an initial divergence of Akkadian from ancestral Semitic over competing hypotheses, e.g., an African origin of Semitic. We estimate an early Bronze Age origin of Semitic approximately 5,750 years ago in the Levant, and further propose that contemporary Ethio-Semitic languages of Africa reflect a single introduction of early Ethio-Semitic from southern Arabia approximately 2,800 years ago. So Proto-Semitic, as I just said, a 2009 study proposed that it was spoken 3,750 years ago, 3,750 BC in the Levant during the early Bronze Age. And then, of course, there's Proto-Sinaitic. And when it comes to Proto-Sinaitic, also known as Northern Semitic alphabet, is considered the earliest trace of alphabetic writing, and that the common ancestor of both ancient South Arabian script as well as the Phoenician alphabet, which led to many modern alphabets, including the Greek alphabet. But our focus is on the ancient Sabaean, or the ancient South Arabian script, which comes from Proto-Sinaitic, which comes from Proto-Semitic. So here's basically like a chart showing this with Proto-Sinaitic right here, Paleo-Hebrew, and then you have the Southern Arabian script, ancient North Arabian, and ancient South Arabian, which are the child systems of the parent system, Proto-Sinaitic. So South Semitic. South Semitic languages, it's part of the larger Afro-Asiatic language family. It's found in North and East Africa and Southwest Asia. Its subdivisions include modern South Arabian, Old South Arabian, and Ethiopian Semitic languages. And when it comes to ancient South Arabian script, languages includes Ge'ez and the Old South Arabian. And as you can see right here, the parent systems, Proto-Sinaitic, ancient South Arabian script. The child systems is Ge'ez, and it's a sister to the Phoenician languages as well, or the Phoenician alphabet as well. And then, of course, you have South Semitic and its divisions. So you have the western branch of South Semitic, which is Old South Arabian, possibly extinct, formerly believed to be the linguistic ancestors of the Southern Arabian Semitic languages. Modern South Arabian now being classified as East South Semitic. And then you have early Ethiopian Semitic languages, also known as Ethio-Semitic or Ethiopian Semitic, on the south coast of the Arabian Peninsula, and also found across the Red Sea in the Horn of Africa, mainly in modern Ethiopia and Eritrea. Then, of course, you have the eastern branch of the South Semitic, which is the modern South Arabian. And these languages are spoken mainly in small minority populations in the Arabian Peninsula, specifically in Yemen and Oman. And then, of course, when it comes to Old South Arabian, it's also known as Yemenite, is a group of 4 closely related extinct languages spoken in the far south portion of the Arabian Peninsula. They were written in the ancient South Arabian script. And then, of course, here's the linguistic classification. So you have Afro-Asiatic, then Semitic, then West Semitic, then South Semitic, then Central Semitic, then Old South Arabian. So you see it's sort of like a tree. And then you have the subdivisions, which is Sabaean and many others. So the ancient South Arabian script is a branch of the Proto-Sinaitic script in about the 9th century BCE. The earliest inscription in the script date to the 9th century BCE in the northern Red Sea region of Eritrea. This is very interesting. And so again, Ethiopian Semitic comes from the South Semitic, specifically from the Western branch. And so when it comes to Ethiopian Semitic or Ethio-Semitic, is a family of languages spoken in Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Sudan. They form the Western branch of the South Semitic languages itself, a sub-branch of the Semitic part of the Afro-Asiatic family. And then, like again, here is the linguistic classification, starting with Afro-Asiatic to Semitic to West Semitic to South Semitic to Ethiopian Semitic in Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Sudan. And it even has subdivisions, North Ethiopic and South Ethiopic. And so here's just a map of the Bayesian model when it talked about the spread of Semitic languages, spreading from the Levant, going all the way into Arabia, and even into the Horn of Africa, where you see Tigray and Ge'ez and the Goreg, and many other Semitic languages, Ethio-Semitic languages. And here's a visualization when it comes to the breakdown as well, starting with the Proto-Semitic right here to the Western Semitic to the South Semitic, and then you have Old South Arabian and Ethiopian, Sabaean, North, and then the North Ethiopian, the South Ethiopian, all trickling down to the Ge'ez and the Amharic and the Goreg and the Tigrayan Ethio-Semitic languages. So it all comes from Proto-Semitic. And then here's just another visualization of it. The Proto-West Semitic or Proto-Sinaitic, the Proto-South Semitic, Proto-Arabic. Then you have the Southern Ancient Yemeni, the Sabaean, the Himyaritic, the Ge'ez Ethiopian, and Amharic. Again, just visually showing you this. And so here is the spread of the Semitic languages from the Levant to the Arabian Peninsula to the Horn of Africa. And then here is the subdivisions. You have the Eastern Semitic languages that are extinct. And then you have the Central Semitic languages with various branches within itself, such as Canaanite to Aramaic. And then you have the South Arabian, which is our focus, and it stretches from the southern Arabia to much of the Horn of Africa. It's all just its own family, part of the Semitic family. And here is Ethio-Semitic and all its sub-branches, the north, including Ge'ez, Tigray, Tigraya, and here's just everything dealing with it. And here's a map visually showing you where the Ethio-Semitic languages are spoken. Again, it's the Horn of Africa. And so when it comes to Ge'ez, Ge'ez is an ancient South Arabian language of the Ethio-Semitic branch. And this language originates from what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea in East Africa. Again, here is the breakdown: Afro-Asiatic, Semitic, West Semitic, South Semitic, Ethiopic, North Ethiopic, then Ge'ez. And then it says the Ge'ez language is classified as a South Semitic language. It evolved from an early Proto-Ethio-Semitic ancestor used to write royal inscriptions of the Kingdom of Dampt in the Ethiographic South Arabian script. So the Kingdom of Dampt seems to be a bit important when it comes to this Ethio-Semitic languages. But let's keep reading. The Ge'ez script is derived from the ancient South Arabian script, which originated in the region centered around what is now Yemen. The earliest inscriptions of Semitic languages in Eritrea and Ethiopia date to the 9th century BCE. And so here's a visualization of how close Ge'ez looks to South Arabian. And so here are all the letters of Ge'ez in yellow, and here are all the letters of South Arabian in red. And as you can see, it's pretty much the same. It's very similar. There might be a few changes here and there. South Arabian looks a bit more blocky, whereas Ge'ez looks a bit more cursive, but that's about it. For the most part, it's pretty much the same language. It's very similar. It'd be like looking at modern English and Old English from Beowulf. But Tigrayan is a Semitic language spoken in Eritrea and North Ethiopia in the Tigray region. Here is the branch of it: Afro-Asiatic, Semitic, West Semitic, South Semitic, Ethiopic, North Ethiopic, Tigrayan. So here's Tigray, better known in Eritrea by its antonym Tigrayit. It is an Afro-Asiatic language spoken in the Horn of Africa. It belongs to the North Ethiopic subdivision of the South Semitic languages and is primarily spoken by the Tigray people in Eritrea. Along with Tigray, it is believed to be the most closely related living language to Ge'ez, which we talked about a few minutes ago. The Tigray mainly inhabited western Eritrea, though they also reside in the North Highlands of Eritrea and its extension into the adjacent part of Sudan, as well as Eritrea's Red Sea coast north of Zula. And just like Tigrayan over here, when it comes to Tigray, it descends from Afro-Asiatic, Semitic, West Semitic, South Semitic, Ethiopic, North Ethiopic, Ge'ez, and Tigray. So Now let's look at the South Ethiopic languages because we talked about the North. Now let's look into the South. So the South Ethiopic languages are a family of many languages spoken throughout Ethiopia. They include the Aramaic languages, which is the official language of Ethiopia. So here is Afroasiatic, Semitic, West Semitic, South Semitic, Ethiopic, and South Ethiopic. So who descends from South Ethiopic? Well, that will be Amharic. Excuse me. Amharic is an Ethio-Semitic language, which is a subgrouping within the Semitic branch of the Afroasiatic languages. And so here's the long branch that gets to Amharic. You have Afroasiatic, Semitic, West Semitic, South Semitic, Ethiopic, South Ethiopic, and then Amharic. So, linguistically, we can see a great migration of South Arabian Semites into the Horn of Africa. Now let's look from an archaeological perspective. So, Sheba, son of Joktan, the kingdom of Damt, or Dimt. Excuse me for my mispronunciation. So, Damt was a kingdom located in Eritrea and North Ethiopia that existed during the 10th to 5th centuries BC. And here, as you can see, it is located in the Horn of Africa, right here. So, given the presence of a large temple complex, the capital of Diempt may have been present-day Yemya in Eritrea region, Ethiopia. At Yehi, the temple of the god Elakum is still standing. Again, forgive me for my mispronunciations, my English. The kingdom developed irrigation schemes, used plows, grew mints, and, and made iron tools and weapons. Some modern historians, including Stuart Monroe Hay, Randolph Fatowski, Alay Bileski, Cain Fadir, and Ephraim Isaac, considered this civilization to be indigenous, although Sabaean influenced due to the latter dominance of the Red Sea, while others like Joseph Michaels, Henry de Constantine, Tickley Task-Davoske, and Stanley Bernstein have viewed Damt as a result of a mixture of Sabaeans and indigenous peoples. After the fall of Damt in the 5th century BC, the plateau came to be dominated by fewer unknown successor kingdoms. This lasted until the rise of one of these polities during the 1st century BC, the Aksumite kingdom, the ancestor of medieval and modern day Ethiopia. As, As, Aksum was able to reunite the area. So this is the name of the moon god Al-Makwam. Again, sorry for the mispronunciation, but this was the temple of the moon god at the ancient Yemenite kingdom in Saba. He was worshipped also in the kingdoms of Diempt and the Aksumite and the Eritrea in North Ethiopia. Just wanted to show what that inscription looked like, the Sabaean inscription. But anyways, the kingdom of Demet. The kingdom of Demet, this kingdom dominated lands to the west, obtaining ivory, torso shells, rhinoceros horns, gold, silver, and slaves, and trading them to South Sabaean merchants. Sometime between the 8th and 6th century BCE, pastoralism and then agriculture developed in northern Africa and southwestern Asia, and as the population grew, an ancient tongue spoken in this region, fissured into the modern languages of the Afroasiatic, formerly Hemito-Semitic family. This family included the Cushitic, Semitic, and Omotic languages now spoken in Ethiopia. During the 2nd millennium BCE, cereal grains and the use of plow were introduced into Ethiopia, possibly from the region of the Sudan, and people speaking Ge'ez, a Semitic language, came to dominate the rich northern highlands of Tigray. There in the 7th century BCE, they established the kingdom of Demet. This kingdom dominated lands to the west, obtaining ivory, torso shells, rhinoceros horns, gold, silver, and slaves, and trade them to South Arabian merchants. So basically what they're saying is that Semitic people speaking Ge'ez came into Ethiopia and formed the kingdom of Demt. So Demt was a kingdom in North Ethiopia and Eritrea that arose between 700 BC to 500 BC. The kingdom seemed to have emerged from trade with Saba on the Arabian Peninsula. It was a provider of myrrh, frankincense, gold, rhinoceros horns, and ivory. Some scholars consider them to be completely indigenous. Others consider them to be a mixture of indigenous and Sabaean roots. A minority consider it of purely Sabaean stock. And I go with the idea that it is a mixture of both indigenous and Sabaean. They had the plow and grew turf, fertile mints, barley, and wheat. Temples and palaces in Yehi represent Damt culture. Some consider Yehi to have once been the capital of Demet. So here is the book Put and Aksum, Egypt and the Horn of Africa by Jake Phillips. And so it says by the mid first millennium BC, a kingdom known to us as Demet had developed inland in North Ethiopia and Eritrea that included at its highest levels a venture of cultural affinities adopted largely from the Sabaean culture centered around the Red Sea in the area of modern Yemen. At this time, a written language was introduced into Demet area that seems almost entirely Sabaean in origin. Monumental buildings were first constructed in an Ashlar monastery, and large-scale sculpture was produced. The center of the Demet culture seems to have been at Yehi, modern North Ethiopia, where a magnificent Ashlar block temple still stands due to its later conversion into a church. And so here is another great paper to read about the Yehi temple. It is called a needs assessment for the restoration and maintenance of the Yehi temple. Historical background is the Yehi in the pre-Aksumite period. This is by Dr. Michael Deblisky. Again, excuse me for mispronunciations, but the temple at Yehi is but one composite of a very large pre-Aksumite settlement complex. The complex also includes a burial area of subterranean tombs, an elite residential area with monumental structure, and a large area of domestic settlement, where the common class of society had their homes. The pre-Aksumite period began in the early 1st millennium BC and is marked by the appearance of nucleate settlements, complex stratified societies and kingdoms, monumental architecture, metal production, and writing. Many archaeologists believe that the pre-Aksumite period began when small groups of South Arabians who for centuries earlier had been involved in economic and cultural contacts with people in the Horn of Africa immigrated across the Red Sea to establish trade settlements. Immigration from South Arabia was more likely to have been a trade diaspora and may have been an effort to develop more direct and intensive relationship in the symbolic trade network that linked societies on both sides of the Red Sea since at least as early as 1500 BC. Archaeological evidence suggests that an initial South Arabian settlement involved small groups of immigrants, establishing trade centers, often associated with temples near Alvum valleys and broad fertile plains, where plow agriculture and irrigation could be practiced. By circa 600 BC, the settlement of Yehi had become perhaps the most important pre-Aksumite center in the highlands of Eritrea and Tigray. By this time, the processes of agriculturation had resulted in the development of a policy called Demet, Demet in Sabaean inscriptions, and Yehi may have been its capital. Demet rulers held the Sabaean titles of Melek, king, and Mekrebi, unifier, or federator. A number of the inscriptions also mention names of elites in Demet society who had come to Maghreb, the center of the kingdom of Saba in Yemen, and suggested that Demet society was organized into clans. It appears that Demet was closely linked economically with the Sabaean Federation of South Arabia, which controlled maritime trade in the South Red Sea region. Demet culture shows strong connections to Sabaean and related Arabian cultures in terms of its archaeological construction techniques, art styles, religious ideology and symbolism, political structure, and the script used in royal text. At the same time, however, Demet culture also shows characteristics of the indigenous culture of the region in terms of its pottery and stone tool industry. Demet, as a amalgam of Ethiopian and South Arabian characteristics that resulted from a long period of economic, social, and political interaction among populations that were linked in the Red Sea trade network. The decline of Demet appears to have begun by circa 400 BC and coincides with the collapse of the Sabaean Federation and its loss of economic dominance in the Red Sea trade network. During the period from 400 through 300 BC, Demet settlements in northern Ethiopia began to decrease in size and number as their political and economic importance declined. The collapse of Demet was followed by a period of political and cultural fragmentation and transformation in the region, an era now termed the Proto-Aksumite phase. The temple at Yehi is perhaps the best surviving example of Sabaean-style temple architecture in the world. In terms of stone dress construction techniques and decorative elements applied to the walls, the Yehi temple is nearly identical to Sabaean temples as that of Awan at Mareb in Yemen and those of related cultures in southern Arabia. So here is the Yehi temple, and basically what they're implying is that the Demet kingdom is a pre-Aksumite kingdom which will eventually roll into the Proto-Aksumite, and these people will be a mixture of indigenous and Sabaean people, which I actually agree with. So now let's look into the Queen of Sheba. So the Queen of Sheba, in Arabic, Belisquis, Ethiopian, Madika, according to Jewish and Islamic traditions, ruler of the kingdom of Saba, or Sheba, which we just talked about, in southwestern Arabia. And now we know that it wouldn't just be southwestern Arabia, it will also be the Horn of Africa. It will be both sides of the Red Sea. This is from Britannia, by the way. The Queen of Sheba appears as a prominent figure in the Kibir Nagas, Glory of the Kings, the Ethiopian national epic and foundation story. According to this tradition, the Queen of Sheba visited Solomon's court after hearing about his wisdom. Melek I was made king by his father, thus founding the royal Solomonic dynasty of Ethiopia, which ruled until the deposition of Haile Selassie I in 1974. And so this is from World History Encyclopedia, the Queen of Sheba, and it says, the Queen of Sheba is the monarch mentioned in the Bible, and then in later works who travels to Jerusalem to experience the wisdom of King Solomon of Israel firsthand. The queen is first mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 10 verse 1 through 13 and 2 Chronicles chapter 9 verse 1 through 12 in the Bible. Then in the later Aramaic Targum Sheni, then the Quran, and finally the Ethiopian work known as the Kibur Nagast. The region of Sheba in the Bible has been identified as the kingdom of Saba, also sometimes referred to as Sheba, in South Arabia, but also with Ethiopia in East Africa, which I agree, it's in both South Arabia and East Africa. The historian Flavius Josephus famously identified her as a queen of Ethiopia and Egypt. Those who argue for an Ethiopian queen claim that she reigned over the kingdom of Aksum, but Aksum did not exist during the reign of Solomon, nor even when the Book of Kings was composed. Aksum only existed as a political entity 100 through 950 CE. It supplemented or evolved into a later kingdom known as Demet, which was influenced by the Sabaean culture of South Arabia. Demet flourished between the 10th and 5th centuries BCE from the capital of Yehi, but little else is known about the culture. Sabaean influence is evident in the temple to the moon god Al-Qum, the most powerful Sabaean deity, which still stands. Scholars are divided on how much the Sabaean influenced the culture of Demet, but the existence of the temple and linguistic similarities indicate a significant Sabaean influence in Demet, which I agree. The books of 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles relates the story of the queen's visit, and it is upon this work, according to the Bible, the biblical tale, once Solomon became king, he asked his God for wisdom in ruling his people. 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 6 through 9. God was pleased with this request and granted it, but also added riches and honor to the king's name, which made Solomon famous from beyond his borders. The queen of Sheba heard of Solomon's great wisdom and the glory of his kingdom and doubted the reports. She therefore traveled to Jerusalem to experience it for herself. The Bible only states that the monarch is the queen of Sheba, 1 Kings chapter 10 verse 1, but never specifies where Sheba is. And she gave, and reading in the box down below, and she gave the king 120 talents of gold, and of spices, very great store, and precious stones. There came no more such abundance of spices as these which the queen of Sheba gave to Solomon. 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 10. After giving Solomon great gifts, the queen received from him all her desire, whatsoever she asked, besides that which Solomon gave her of her royal bounty, and then returns to her country with her servants. 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 13. In the Kibur Nagast, the glory of the kings of Ethiopia, this story is retold but developed further. Here, the queen's name is Makeda, ruler of Ethiopia, who is told of the wonders of Jerusalem under King Solomon's reign by a merchant named Timrin. Timrin has been part of the expedition to Jerusalem, supplying material from Ethiopia for the construction of Solomon's temple. Makeda tells him, talking about Solomon, he can sleep with her since she has broken her oath. And there's a whole situation that went on in the Kibur Nagast where there was an oath made and it was broken, but the gist is they slept together, King Solomon and Queen Sheba. Before she leaves Jerusalem, Solomon gives her his ring to remember him and to remember him by, and on her journey home, she gives birth to a son who she names Menelik, a son of a wise man. Menelik is welcomed by Solomon and stays in Jerusalem for some years studying the Torah. In time, however, he must leave, and Solomon decrees that the firstborn son of nobles will accompany Menelik back home. Before the group departs, one of the sons of the nobles steals the Ark of the Covenant from the temple and replaces it with a duplicate as the caravan leaves Jerusalem. The Ark goes with them. Menelik returns to his mother in Ethiopia with the Ark, which is enshrined in the temple, and according to legend, remains there to the present day. And so now let's go into the kingdom of Aksum. But before we go into that, basically there is a very deep tradition that Ethiopian people do descend partly from a Semitic group. In this case, it is with King Solomon and people in Israel, but I'm just add this in to show that there is like a Semitic connection with Ethiopian peoples, whether it be the Sabaeans or whether it be King Solomon and them. I prefer it be the Sabaeans with a little bit of the King Solomon story, but now let's get into the kingdom of Aksum. So the kingdom of Aksum, also known as the Aksumite Empire, was an ancient kingdom that controlled Eritrea, North Ethiopia, parts of Eastern Sudan, and South Yemen as its peak. It was centralized in Eritrea and North Ethiopia, and its capital was Aksum. Aksumite rulers styled themselves as King of Kings, King of Aksum, Hamir, Radem, Saba, Shalim, Toloskumu, forgive me for my mispronunciations, Beja, and Cush, ruled by the Aksumites. It existed from approximately 80 BC to AD 825. The kingdom's ancient capital, also called Aksum, is now a town in Tigray region, North Ethiopia. The kingdom used the name Ethiopia as early as the 4th century. Tradition claims Aksum as the alleged residing place of the Ark of the Covenant and the prominent home of the Queen of Sheba. Aksumites, and this is from Britannia, Aksum's culture comprised Ge'ez written in the modified South Arabian alphabet structure and architecture based on South Arabian prototypes, and an amalgam of local and Middle Eastern deities. Thus, evidence exists of a close cultural exchange between Aksum and the Arabian Peninsula. But the tradition's scholarly view that South Arabian immigrants actually peopled and created pre-Aksumite North Ethiopia is increasingly under siege. Nevertheless, the ancient cultural exchange across the Red Sea became enshrined in Ethiopian legend in the persons of Makeda, the Queen of Sheba, and the Israelite king of Solomon. And so here's a great paper dealing with Aksum. It's called Aksum and African Civilization of Late Antiquity by Stuart Moreau Hay. And read this paper when you get a chance. It's excellent. So the Aksumite origins are still uncertain, but a strong South Arabian Sabaean influence in architecture, religion, and cultural features can be detected in the pre-Aksumite period. From about the 5th century BC, it is clear that contacts across the Red Sea were at one time very close. A kingdom called Demet appears to be read as Demot, is attested in Ethiopian inscriptions as at this early date, and though the period between this and the development of Aksum around the beginning of the Christian era is an Ethiopian Dark Age, for us at present, it may be summarized that the Demet monarchy and its successors and the other Ethiopian chiefdoms continued something of the same Ethio-Sabaean civilization until eventually preordinated by Aksum. The Semitic-speaking people called Aksumites are Habesha, Abyssinians, centered at their capital city of Aksum in the western part of the province of Eritrea. From there came the control of both the highland and coastal regions of northern Ethiopia. Inscriptions found at some of its sites include the names of persons bearing the traditional South Arabian title of Maghribi, apparently indicating a ruler with something of a priest-king status, not otherwise known in Ethiopia. Others have titled it Menelik or Melek. Evidently, the pre-Aksumite Sabaean influenced traditional province did not consist merely of a few briefly occupied staging posts, but a widespread and well-established phenomenon. Evidently, the arrival of Sabaean style does not represent the beginning of the Ethiopian civilization. For a long time, different peoples had been interacting through the population movements, warfare, trade, and intermarriage in the Ethiopian region, resulting in a prominence of peoples speaking languages of the Afro-Asiatic family. The main branches represented were the Cushitic and the Semitic. Semiticized Awak peoples are thought to have migrated from southeast Eritrea, possibly as early as 2000 BC, bringing their Proto-Ethiopic language, ancestor of Ge'ez, and other Ethiopian Semitic languages with them. And this and other groups had already developed specific cultural and linguistic identities by the time any Sabaean influence arrived. Features such as dressed stone buildings, writing, and ironworking may have been introduced by Sabaeans, but words for plow and other agricultural vocabulary are apparently of Awak origin in Ethiopian Semitic languages, indicating that the techniques of food production were not one of the Arabian imports. At Matara and Yehai, for example, archaeologists have distinguished phrases represented by pottery types which seem to owe nothing to South Arabia, but do have Sudanese affinities. The Italian archaeologist Fredo Fetzic, who is partly interest who is particularly interested himself in the study, has suggested that pre-Aksumite culture might owe something to Nubia, specifically a C group Kerma influence, and later to Meroe. And if you want to know more about Nubia and the C group, Kerma, and the Sudanese, as they mentioned, refer to my video, Eber and Azurad, who are the descendants of Cush, son of Ham, because this is very interesting. It's sort of implying that there was a mixture of Semitic and basically Sudanese peoples. So refer back again to Eber and Azurad, who are the descendants of Cush, son of Ham. And by the way, Eber is the father of Joktan. And we'll touch more on stuff like that later. But back to the study. Worsening ecological conditions in the savanna Sahel belt might have introduced certain peoples to move from plains and lowlands up to the plateau in the second half of the second millennium BC, bringing with them certain cultural traditions, evidence for early trade activity to regions across the Red Sea, from eastern Sudan and Ethiopia at about this time had been noted by Zirins, 1988, with reference to the Assyrian trade. Extremely increasing results have lately come from work in the Dash Delta on the Ethio-Sudanese borderlines, indicating the existence of a complex society there in the late third early second millennium BC, possibly the location of the land of Punt. There reinforces this suggestion. The latest work suggests that in the late second and early first millennium BC, the eastern part of Eritrea plateau was included in the widespread cultural complex on both the African and Arabian Timarayim coast of the Red Sea, in contact with the lowlands of the Sudan and perhaps within the Nile Valley, while the western part was in contact with the peoples of the Gash Delta. These two regions of the plateau later became united culturally and politically under the Damped monarchy. It appears that there were undoubtedly some South Arabian immigrants in Ethiopia in the mid first millennium BC, but there is, unless the interpretation of Michael's is accepted, no sure indication that they were politically dominated. They may have been military or trading colonists living in some sort of symbiosis with the local Ethiopian population, perhaps under a species of treaty status. It seems that the pre-Aksumite society on the Tigray Plateau centered in the Aksumite/Yeha region, but extending from Tegedo in the north of Dindaretia in the south, which achieved state level and that the major entity came to be called Demet, as appears in the regional title, Makrebi of Demet and Saba. The Sabaeans in Ethiopia appear, from the use of certain place names like Maghreb in their inscription, to have kept in contact with their own country, and indeed the purpose of their presence may well have been to maintain and develop links across the sea to profit of South Arabia's trade network. The inscription dates the inscriptions dating from this period in Ethiopia are apparently written in two languages, pure Sabaean and the other with certain aspects found in later Ge'ez. All the royal inscriptions are uh, in the second, presumably Ethiopian language. A number of different tribes and families seem to be mentioned by the inscription of this period, but there is no evidence to show whether any of these groups lasted into the Aksumite period. Uh, Julian Pendry, most recent 1987 proposal results in a radical different view of the Ethiopian/South Arabian context, weighting up the evidence from all sides, particularly aspects of material culture and linguistic/slash uh, paleogeographic information. She suggests that according to this theory, and this is in her language, according to this theory, one group of the Sabaeans would have left North North Arabia, where they then established for Ethiopia in about the 8th or 7th century BC under pressure from the Assyrians. They then continued into South Arabia. A second wave of immigrants in the 6th and 5th century would reign over the kingdom of Demet and would have been accompanied by Hebrews fleeing after Nebuchadnezzar's capture of Jerusalem. An explanation for the later Ethiopian traditions with their Jewish and biblical flavor, and for the Falashas or Black Jews of Ethiopia. These Sabaeans too, in their turn, would have departed for the Yemen, taking the writing and agriculture which they had first perfected in Eritrea. In the 4th and 3rd century BC, the remaining Sabaean would have left Ethiopia for the Yemen, leaving elements of their civilization and traditions firmly embedded in the Ethiopia's way of life. Altars, inscriptions, steles, temples, secular structures, tombs, and other materials left by the Sabaean influenced Ethiopian population occurred in considerable numbers, even from the few excavated sites. Those attributed to the Sabaeans themselves occurred more rarely. The monuments are dated from the 5th century BC by study of the later form of the letter forms used on them, and seem to appear in Ethiopia at about the same time as they do in South Arabia. It was also during this period that iron was introduced into the country, In the present state of knowledge, it is unclear how much of Aksumite civilization was a direct continuation of a cultural heritage from pre-Aksumite times, or how much any South Arabian aspects might be later attributed to a renewal of overseas contacts in the period after the consolidation of Aksum as an independent polity in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. So here is a map showing the Aksumite Empire. It is, as I said, both in the Horn of Africa, but also in southern Arabia and Yemen. See right here, Kingdom of Aksum, Abyssinia, Hamir, Sabaean, Sheba. Same thing right here, Hamir, Sabaean, Sheba, Aksum. So yeah. So now, World History Encyclopedia, Kingdom of Aksum. So we talked about the pre-Aksumite and the Proto-Aksumite. Now let's actually get into the Aksumite kingdom. So the African kingdom of Aksum, located on the northern edge of the highland zone of the Red Sea coast, just above the Horn of Africa, was founded in the 1st century CE, flourished from the 3rd to 6th century CE, and then survived as a much smaller political entity into the 8th century CE. The territory of Aksum, once controlled, is today occupied by the states of Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia, and Somaliland, prospering thanks to agriculture, cattle herding, and control over trade routes, which saw gold and ivory exchanged for foreign luxury goods. The kingdom and its capital of Aksum built lasting stone monuments and achieved a number of the first. And so this is from the Met.com, Foundation of Aksumite Civilization and its Christian Legacy, 1st through 8th century. And it says, Ethiopia's rich and unique artistic heritage is the product of a series of transcontinental cultural exchanges whose beginnings can be traced back as far as the late 1st millennium BC. At this time, South Arabian immigrants began to arrive in the Ethiopian highlands from across the Red Sea, bringing with them a belief in diverse gods, a system of writing, and a tradition of monumental stone building that would profoundly influence the region's architectural and religious traditions. The famous early manifestation of this influence still extant is the 60 by 50 foot stone structure at Yehi in modern-day northern Ethiopia, estimated to have been constructed around the 5th or 4th century BC, possibly once a temple to a South Arabian deity. This rectangular building was constructed by 10-foot sandstone blocks fitted together without a use of mortar. Located approximately 30 miles southwest of Yehi, the fertile Hashbo plain, where Aksumite civilization originated, began to be populated in the 4th to 3rd centuries BC. To the faithful of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, it is the place where the Ark of the Covenant was brought by Menelik I, son of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon of Israel, as detailed in the 13th century Kebra Nagast, the Book of the Glory of the Kings. This is another article, The Kingdom of Aksum. While migrations were taking place in the south half of Africa, there were also taking place along the east coast. Arab peoples crossed the Red Sea into Africa, perhaps as early as 1000 BC. The origins of Aksum. A legend traces the founding of the kingdom of Aksum and the Ethiopian royal dynasty to the son of King Solomon of ancient Israel and the Queen of Sheba, a country in South Arabia. So, now let's look into the modern descendants of the Sabaean, Demot, Aksum civilizations. So, Sheba, son of Joktan, the Habesha peoples. So the Habesha peoples is an ethnic group identifier frequently employed to refer to Semitic-speaking Semitic language speaking peoples mainly found in the highlands of Ethiopia and Eritrea. At its extremities, the term is currently sometimes employed in the in the resi- in the restrictive sense to only refer to speakers of Tigray, while recently some within diasporic communities have adopted the term to refer to all people of Eritrean or Ethiopian origin. Although English usage almost always includes Amharas and all other Highland Semitic speaking peoples, one very restrictive use of the term by Eritreans refers exclusively to speakers of Tigray. Within the Ethiopian and Eritrean diasporic populations, some second generation immigrants have adopted the term Habesha in a broader sense as a supranational ethnic identifier exclusive to all Eritreans and Ethiopians, or inclusive of all Eritreans and Ethiopians. Abyssinian civilization has its roots in the pre-Aksumite culture. The early kingdom to arise was that of the Demant in the 8th century BC. The kingdom of Aksum, one of the powerful civilizations in the world, was based there from about 150 BC to the mid of 12th century AD. Throughout history, populations in the Horn of Africa have been interacting through migration, trade, warfare, and intermarriage. Most people in the region spoke Afro-Asiatic, with the family's Cushitic and Semitic branches predominated. As early as the 3rd millennium BCE, the pre-Oxumites had begun trading along the Red Sea. They mainly traded with Egypt. The kingdom of Aksum may have been founded as early as 300 BCE. Very little is known very little is known of the time period between the mid 1st millennium BCE to the beginning of Aksum's rise around the 1st century CE. It is thought to be a successor kingdom of Demant, a kingdom in the early 1st millennium BC, most likely centered at nearby Yeha. The kingdom of Aksum was situated in northern Ethiopia and Eritrea, with its capital city in northern Ethiopia. From its capital, Aksum commanded the trade of ivory. In exchange for Aksum's goods, traders bids many kinds of cloth, jewelry, metals, and steel for weapons. At its peak, Aksum controlled territories as far south as southern Egypt, east of the Gulf of Aden, south of Omo River, and west of the Nubian kingdom of Meroe. Their descendants include the present-day ethnic groups known as the Amhara, Tigrayans, and the Goreg peoples. The imperial family of Ethiopia, which is currently in exile, claims its origin directly from the descent of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, who is named Makeda. In the Ethiopian account, the Ethiopian narrative of the Kebra Nagash Scroll of the Kings, the tradition is that the biblical Queen of Sheba was an indigenous ruler of Ethiopia who visited King Solomon in Jerusalem, is repeated in the 1st century account by the Roman Jewish historian Josephus. He identified Solomon's visitor as the Queen of Egypt and Ethiopia. In the past, European scholars, including Hippo Ledorf and Carlo Cantoni Rozzoni, postulated that the ancient communities that evolved into modern Ethiopia states were formed by a migration across the Red Sea of Semitic-speaking South Arabians around 1000 BC, who intermarried with local non-Semitic speaking peoples. Both the indigenous languages of South Arabian and the Amharic and the Tigrayan languages of Ethiopia belong to a large branch of South Semitic languages, which in turn is part of the Afro-Asiatic family. Even though the Ethio-Semitic languages are classified under the South Semitic languages, branch with a Cushitic language substring. There is evidence of a Semitic-speaking presence in Ethiopia and Eritrea as early as 2000 BC. There is also evidence of ancient South Arabian communities in modern day Ethiopia and Eritrea in certain localities, attested by some archaeological artifacts and ancient Sabaean inscriptions in the Old South Arabian alphabet. However, Stuart Moreau Hay points to the existence of an older Demid kingdom prior to any Sabaean migration, 4th or 5th century BC. Archaeological evidence has revealed a region called Saba in North Ethiopia and Eritrea. It is now referred to as Ethiopian Saba to avoid confusion. Before the 20th century, the Sabaean theory was the most common one explaining the origins of the Habesha. They said that at the early epoch, South Arabian tribes, including one called Habeshet, immigrated across the Red Sea from Yemen to Eritrea. According to this theory, Sabaeans brought with them South Arabian letters and language, which gradually evolved into the Ge'ez language and the Ge'ez script. Linguists have revealed, however, that although its script developed from Ethiographic South Arabian, whose oldest inscriptions are found in Yemen, Ethiopia, and Eritrea, used to write the old South Arabian languages. And down below, as you can see, you have an ancient understanding that there was a people known as the Habeshet in Yemen, in South Arabia, that crossed into the Horn of Africa, where the Habesha people descend from. And so Ethiopia and Sudan are among the main areas linguists suggest were the Afro-Asiatic homeland. Recent linguistic studies as to the origin of the Ethio-Semitic languages seem to support the DNA findings of immigration from the Arabian Peninsula, with a recent study using Bayesian computational phylogenetic techniques, finding the contemporary Ethio-Semitic languages of Africa reflect a single introduction of early Ethio-Semitic from South Arabia approximately 2,800 years ago, and that this single introduction of Ethio-Semitic subsequently underwent quick diversification within Ethiopia and Eritrea. So basically, using the Bayesian model, it's pretty much an established fact that 2,800 years ago, you had people from South Arabia come into the Horn of Africa, bringing forth the Ethio-Semitic language, and it quickly, spread and diversified into different branches. So the Habesha developed an agricultural society, which most continue, including raising of camels, donkeys, and sheep. Coffee is a very important ceremonial drink. Houses in rural areas are built mostly from rock and dirt and most available resources, with structure provided by timber poles. Habesha have a rich heritage of music and dance, using drums and stringed instruments in tune to a pentatonic scale. Abyssinians speak languages belonging to the Ethio-Semitic branch of Afroasiatic. The Kingdom of Demant wrote Proto-Ge'ez in the epigraphic South Arabian as early as the 9th century BCE. Later, an independent script replaced it as early as the 5th century BCE. Some historians in the past have labeled the Ethiopian Semitic languages as the Abyssinian languages. They are mainly spoken by the Amhara, the Tigrayans, the Tigray, the Goreg, the Goregba, the Himari people. Forgive me for my mispronunciations. In antiquity, Ge'ez-speaking peoples inhabited Aksum Empire. And so here's actually a great paper dealing with the ties between Ethiopia and Yemen. It's called Ethiopia's Historic Ties with Yemen by Richard Huskis. Forgive me. Ethiopia and Yemen, two historic countries on either side of the Red Sea. The Gulf of Aden had been in contact since almost the dawn of time. The highlands of the Yemeni and Ethiopian regions, as the archaeologist David Philipston notes, have much in common physically and environmentally. They form part of a wider region which Wilter Regging observes has not very close geographical, climate, zoological, and botanical connections, but also cultural links, which have also been equally at times exhibiting exceptionally strong. In antiquity, the Ethiopian and Yemeni histories is apparent from the fact that traditions in both countries go back 12 centuries to the time of the renowned Queen of Sheba, the Habashat, and the origins of the Ethiopian civilization. And an intimate relationship between Ethiopia and Yemen in ancient times have been postulated from the fact that several places and clan names, as well as inscriptions in the South Arabian language, Sabaean, are found in both countries. The existence of shared names on either side of the Red Sea caused the Italian scholar Carlo Cretoni Rosoni to postulate, however, somewhat simplicitly, that the very name Abyssinia was of Yemeni origin. The word was generally believed to have derived from the name Habashet, used to designate a people which lived in the north of the historic Ethiopia in what are now the highlands of, part of Eritrea and Tigray. Country Rosoni assumed that the Habashat actually originated in Ethiopia and later established themselves as colonialists on the Ethiopian side of the Red Sea, where he believed they introduced their name. It was his belief, furthermore, that the South Arabian language and writing represented the origin and basis of the Ethiopian tongue and script Ge'ez. These suppositions were once widely accepted. The British erudite Spencer Tigraham, for example, wrote in 1952 that the Habashat or agriculturalists mountaineers of Yemen. The Habashat, he claims, thereupon assumed a prominence over all other tribes, and its chiefs took the title Nugus Negasi, chief of chiefs. As a result, the kingdom of Habashat consolidated itself about the 3rd century BC, when its rule extended over the plateau region of Eritrea and northern Tigray. So this is a book called Historical Dictionary of Eritrea by Dan Connolly and Tom Conline. Habasha, a self-descriptive cultural definition derived from Abyssinia, today applied to members of the Tigray ethno-linguistic group, as well as Tigray and Amharic-speaking Christians in Ethiopia. Habasha defines the culture that was produced by the fusion of Semitic and Cushitic elements in the Eritrean Tigrayan highlands, and that flowered as an original civilization during the Aksumite period. The derivation of the word is disputed, but it was clearly used in ancient South Arabia to describe the people of the Eritrean and Tigrayan region. It is not the name of any known South Arabian tribal group, Conti Razoni notwithstanding, nor of any known group that existed on the African side of the Red Sea. The name occurs in Sabaean inscriptions describing people from the Eritrean Tigray region as early as the 1st century AD. The South Arabian sources refer to the Aksumite Empire as the Kingdom of Habashet. So now let's look at the Tigrayan people, because they mentioned that quite a bit. So when it comes to the Ethiopian Semitic language, Tigrayan is included. It is a Semitic language spoken in Eritrea and the northern Ethiopia and the Tigray region. So Tigrayans speak Tigray as a mother tongue. It belongs to the Ethiopian Semitic subgroup of the Afroasiatic family. Tigray is closely related to Amharic and Tigray, another Ethiopian Semitic language spoken by the Tigri, as well as many Beja. The Ge'ez script evolved from the epigraphic South Arabian script, whose first inscriptions are from the 8th century BC in Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Yemen. The majority of Tigrayans trace their origin to early Semitic-speaking peoples, whose presence in the region dates back to at least 2000 BC, based on linguistic evidence. So Tigrayans are, again, a Semitic people going back to 2000 BC. And 2000, the second millennium BC, expanding to the years 2000 through 1001 BC, in the ancient Near East is marked by the transition of the Middle to the Late Bronze Age. So it's very ancient. The first half of the millennium is dominated by the Middle Kingdom of Egypt and Babylonia, and the alphabet develops. So they've been there for a long time. So the Tigray people, also known as the Tigrania, are an ethnic group in Eritrea. Again, forgive me for my mispronunciation, but there's a map, as you can see, where they will be located in northern Ethiopia. So one view believes that the name comes from the word Tigrayet, meaning to ascend. The Tigraya tribe, also known as the Tigrayites, were first mentioned alongside the Tigray people around 1000 BC near Aldolius. In Eritrea, the Tigray people are referred to as Barrier Tigraya, people of the Kabasa people. Kabasa meaning Eritrean highlands. Both the Tigraya and Tigray tribes in Eritrea are very close kin to ethnic group Tigrayans in Eritrea, Ethiopia. All the Tigrayas, Tigray, and Tigrayans peoples are supposedly from the same group until the 8th century and shared the Aksumite kingdom before its demise. The Tigrayans in Tigray abandoned the declining kingdom of Aksum, and the Tigraya people built the kingdom of Medri Habiri in Eritrea by Bahiri Nagasi, and the Agwa built the Zagwa dynasty in Ethiopia by Morora Gebestorso of Hamasien. Forgive me for my pronunciation. The oldest settled pastoral and agricultural community lived in Oyan, the village and towns near Asmir, around 800 BC. The language known as Tigray was believed to be spoken in the region around 1000 BC. Dimit was believed to be home to the settled community in southern Eritrea and northern Ethiopia from around 8th century BC to 4th century BC. So this is from encyclopedia.com, still dealing with the Tigray. The Tigray, the Tigrayi, and the Tigrayan have a history that goes back before the time of Jesus Christ. Over the past 2,000 years, all the Ethiopian emperors have either been Tigray or Amharas, the ethnic group in Ethiopia most closely identified with Tigray, which later became the Ethiopian Empire, was founded by Menelik, the son of King Solomon of Israel and Queen Sheba or Saba. Tigray, the language spoken in Eritrea, is from the Semitic family of languages and is related to Arabic, Hebrew, and Aramaic, the language spoken by Jesus Christ. And so this is from Britannia, Tigray. Tigray, or Tigraya people of central Eritrea and of the Eritrea region in northern Ethiopia. The Tigray speak Tigraya, a Semitic language related to Ge'ez and the Tigray, the language of a separate people, the Tigray people, inhabiting northwest Eritrea. The Tigray are descendant of a Semitic people, again, who intermixed with Cushitic inhabitants in the region and founded the Christian kingdom of Aksum, which had its capital in the historic region of Tigray. And so Tigray in Eritrea, this is from joshuaproject.net. The Tigray people are related to the Amhara and Tigray people of Ethiopia and Eritrea, who together make up the Habashians. These people trace their origins back to Shem, the oldest son of Noah. They left present-day Yemen and settled on the African side of the Red Sea, inhabiting the Nile Delta and all land east of the valley down to the Ethiopian highlands. Here they established other great kingdoms such as Sheba/Saba and Aksum. After the Middle Ages, they soon split into three tribes: Amhara, Tigray, and Tigrayans, with their own languages that all derive from Ge'ez, their ancient language. And so I'm just over and over again just stressing the fact that they are a Semitic people that are in the Horn of Africa, descending from Shem, specifically from Sheba, son of Joktan. And so the Tigray people, who are also known as the Kabas people, are the largest ethnic group in Eritrea. They speak Tigray, a Semitic language derived from Ge'ez. Tigraya people were a mixture of Yemeni, Sabaean, and Eritrean origin. So now let's look at the Tigray people. I know I said Tigray and Tigray, and they sound very similar. I'm going to pronounce this as Tigray people. So the Tigray are better known in Eritrea by Tigriit, is an Afro-Asiatic language spoken in the Horn of Africa. It belongs to the North Ethiopic subdivision of the South Semitic languages and is primarily spoken by the Tigray people in Eritrea, along with Tigraya. It is believed to be the most closely related living language to Ge'ez. The Tigray mainly inhabited western Eritrea, though they also reside in the northern highlands of Eritrea and its extension into the adjacent part of Sudan, as well as Eritrea's Red Sea coast north of Zula. So Tigray are a nomadic agro-pastoralist community living in the northwestern and coastal highlands of Eritrea. The Tigray speak the Tigray language, which belongs to the Semitic branch of the Afro-Asiatic family. The Tigray are closely related to the Beher Tigraya of Eritrea, as well as the Beja. The Tigray languages is an Afro-Asiatic language of the Semitic branch. The Tigray, like Tigraya, it is a member of the Ethiopian Semitic group and is similar to the ancient Ge'ez. The Tigray people language and their area of inhabitation should not be confused with that of the Tigrayans, who live in the northern Ethiopia, and the Behiran Tigraya, who live in the central Eritrean highlands, both of which speak varying dialects of Tigraya, a closely related Semitic language. So Tigray, people inhabiting northwest Eritrea and limited areas of bordering Sudan. The Tigray speak Tigray, a Semitic language related to ancient Ge'ez and to the modern Tigraya, the language of the Tigray people. The largest federation of Tigray is that of Beni Amir, a branch of the historically important Beja peoples. The life of the nomadic herdsman, so characteristic of neighboring Sudan, is followed by most Tigray. So Tigray language, Semitic language of the Tigray people of northwest Eritrea and smaller areas of neighboring Sudan. It is closely related to the ancient Ge'ez language and modern Tigraya. So now let's look at the Amhara people. So Amhara is an Ethio-Semitic language, which is a subgrouping within the Semitic branch of the Afro-Asiatic languages. Amharas have historically inhabited the north, central, and western parts of Ethiopia and are mainly agriculturalists, perhaps constituting the earliest farming groups in Ethiopia, along with other groups such as Awags, Goregs, Gathites, Goregabites, and Hamiris. Forgive me for pronunciations. Some suggest their origins to be modern-day Yemen, Sheba, and Hamir, the kingdom of Aksum, and relocated to Amhara Saniat. Many scholars have classified the Amhara and the Tigrayans as Abyssinians. And so this is a book, Encyclopedia of Africa, that deals with the Amhara. The Amhara, one of the two largest ethnic groups of Ethiopia, occupies central and western Ethiopia. Traditionally, the Amhara have been the country's dominant people. All but one of the Ethiopian emperors from Amhara. Their language, Amharic, a Semitic language like Hebrew or Arabic, has been the country's official language. Archaeological evidence suggests that sometime before 500 BCE, a Semitic-speaking people from, from whom the Amhara are descended migrated from present-day Yemen to the area of northern Ethiopia that would become Aksum. These Himyarites, as they have come to be called, intermarried with indigenous speakers of Cushitic languages, such as Awag, and gradually spread south into present-day homeland to the present-day homeland of the Amhara. Their descendants spoke Ge'ez, an ancient Semitic tongue that is no longer spoken, but remains the official language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. According to the traditional account containing the national epic Kibra Ge'ez for the glory of the kings, the Amhara are related groups such as, the Amhara and related groups such as the Tigrayans are descended from the Israelite king of Solomon and the queen of Sheba. Therefore, each Ethiopian emperor held the title King Lion of Judah. So, the descendants of Joktan, son of Sheba, would have made up of South Arabians from Yemen and Ethio-Semitic people. What's interesting about the Habasha, the Tigrayans, the Tigray, and the Amhara is that all these Ethio-Semitic groups have high amounts of haplogroup E. So here's a chart showing Ethiopian Y-DNA haplogroups. 57.5% of their DNA is haplogroup E. And here is a chart showing the various different haplogroups that Ethiopians have. I particularly highlighted the Ethiopian Semitic speakers and Ethiopian Jews. A lot of them have various branches of haplogroup E. It is typically the highest amount among them. And of course, you do see some haplogroup A, which is quite common, but that's because of the Cushitic influence. But you do see a lot of haplogroup E. And when, again, we mentioned the Tigray people of Eritrea, the Tigray people of Eritrea have 100% when it comes to haplogroup E among their population. They have a high amount of the E-V32, and as well as a good amount of E-V6, which is typically seen in Yemen, and another good amount of E-V1515. But E is very high among the Tigray Eritrea, who are a Semitic people. When it comes to the Tigray, the Amhara, and the Goreg, they have over 50% of haplogroup E. Over here is haplogroup E in the dark, and they have over 50%. All these being Ethio-Semitic peoples. And again, this is from the variation in Y chromosome, mitochondrial DNA, and the labels of identity in Ethiopia. Then dealing with the Semitic people in Ethiopia, we see again a very high amount of haplogroup E. It shows over very close to like 60% when it comes to haplogroup E among the Semitic population. And still using this paper, when it comes to the Amhara, they have very close to, again, in between 50% to 60% of haplogroup E, the Amhara being a Semitic people in the Horn of Africa. And here's another chart. Here are the sources down below. And it shows that the Amhara, as shown earlier, that they are close to 60 to 50%. Same thing with Ethiopian Jews, being close to 50% of haplogroup E markers. Haplogroup E is dominant among these Ethio-Semitic peoples. Ethiopian Jews in Ethiopia have, again, very close to around 50% of haplogroup E. So, with all that being said, haplogroup E among the Ethio-Semites likely came from South Arabia, and the haplogroup E among the Arabians would have come from the Levant. The migration of haplogroup E from the Levant matches Joktanite Arabians. The history and the language match as well. So this is a paper, the genetic structure of the Kuwaiti and the Alaska Island population, Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA variation. The distribution of the E1B1B1, previously known as E3B1-M35, and its derivatives E1B1B1C and E-M123 and E1B1B1C1 E-M34 in Yemen, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates suggests that these haplotypes arrived in Arabia more likely through the Levantine corridor rather than through the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. The Near East is another possible place of origin of the E1B1B1C-M123 lineage due to its high frequency in the area compared to it is the Eastern African presence restricted to Ethiopia. However, Flores et 2005 found that the highest frequency of the E1B1B1C1-M34 to date is in the Dead Sea. Population sample from Jordan is 31%. In Saudi Arabia, two individuals carrying the basal lineage E-M96 have been identified. DE-Yap evolved outside of Africa. One DE-Yap ancestor possibly spread into Asia and evolved into haplogroup D, and another DE-Yap ancestor returned to Africa and evolved into haplogroup E. So, this website, haplogroup E1B1B Y-DNA from EUpedia says that E-M34 is the main Middle Eastern variety of E1B1B and is thought to have arrived with the Proto-Semitic people in the late Copper to early Bronze Age. Basically, E being in the Levant, spreading in and throughout the Arabian Peninsula, and even going into Africa, and that haplogroup E is Proto-Semitic. And going into what they said about E being in the Jordan, the highest frequencies of E-M123 are observed in the Jordan, 31% near the Dead Sea, Ethiopia at 5 to 20%, Israel/Palestine, 10 through 12% among the Palestinians and the Jews. And so this is another paper called Isolates of a Corridor of Migrations, a High Resolution Analysis of Y Chromosome Variation in the Jordan. And it says the Dead Sea sample also showed a high presence of E3B3A-M34 lineages, 31%, which is only comparable to that found in Ethiopians. Haplogroup E3B is the second most abundant in the Jordan at 18%. The E3B3A-M34 derivative from E3B3-123 testifies to one of its re-expansions from the Middle East to Africa and Western Asia. In fact, 4 out of 5 E3B3-M123 chromosomes detected in Jordan belong to E3B3A-34 subclades. So basically, we find a lot of this E-M123 haplogroup in the Levant, more so than even in Africa. And so this paper right here, again, when it comes to E-M34, lineages experience a much more dramatic expansion during the Chalcolithic Copper Age period. Also downstream of CTS1096, the Y14891 and the Z21018 clades typically found among people of Jewish ancestry, while PF6391 and Z21421 are found in the Levant, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, and the Arabian Peninsula. F1382 appears to have expanded during the Iron Age from the Levant into the Arabian Peninsula, where it is almost exclusively found today, which kind of fits with the spread of the Sapiens. And so this is another great paper dealing with haplogroup E, phylogeographic analysis of haplogroup E3b. Y chromosome reveals multiple migratory events within and out of Africa. And so it says E-M34 chromosomes were more likely introduced in Ethiopia from the Near East. So this branch of E came into Ethiopia from the Middle East. And so it says, although frequency distributions of E-M34 could suggest that East Africa was the place in which the haplogroup arose, two observations point to a Near Eastern origin. One, within Eastern Africa, that haplogroup appears to be restricted to Ethiopia, since it has not been detected either in neighboring Somalia or Kenya, present study, or Sudan. So it's not found in Somalia or Kenya, Sudan. It's only in Ethiopia, which is interesting because that's what we were talking about, where we find these Ethio-Semitic peoples. But anyways, continuing with the study, it says, by contrast, E-M34 chromosomes have been found in a large majority of populations in the Near East so far analyzed. E-M34 chromosomes from Ethiopia show lower variants than those from the Near East and appear closely related in the E-M34 network. If our interpretation is correct, E-M34 chromosomes could have been introduced into Ethiopia from the Near East, which fits quite well with the Sabians. And this paper, called Y chromosome haplogroup E, their distribution and implication to the origin of Afroasiatic languages and pastoralism, it says, the Yemeni, Saudi Arabia, and Oman populations, on the other hand, form a Near Eastern group. The link between the Yemeni and Omani populations with Afar and Shio populations from Eritrea could be attributed to the geographical proximity and possibly past genetic history. The Shio and Afar populations of Eritrea tend to cluster with the Near Eastern or Arabian populations. Interestingly, populations from Egypt, Tunisia, and Ethiopia, Ethiopian Jews, assumed an intermediate position between the Near East and between the East African and the Near Eastern clusters. A branching of the network may once again represent an episode of human migration that carried the haplogroup E-M35 and its subclades further to the western coast of the Red Sea, to Yemen, Oman, and Saudi Arabia, and concurrently down to southern Africa as part of a more recent Y chromosome movement out of Africa migration episode. The PCA and MDS display similarity in similar interesting grouping of the Afar and Shio populations in Eritrea with their Near Eastern Arabian populations, and conjure up the genetic relationship of the two sides of the Red Sea. The arrival of the E-M35 and derived subclades, for example, E-M123/E-M34, which we just talked about, to Arabia appears to be strongly linked to the expansion into East Africa, North Africa, Europe, Southern Africa, an event that has been related to pastoralism. So it's interesting. They're basically saying that these branches of E, such as E-M35, E-M123, E-M34, they came from the Near East into East Africa and spread, and these haplogroup E markers brought pastoralism, which is interesting because that's what we see as well with the Sabians. They bring a type of pastoralism and their own type of culture. But not only that, we also see that these Horn African populations are indeed related to these populations in Yemen and Oman and Saudi Arabia, which also have haplogroup E. If you want to know about that, look at my video that I did called Joktan, son of Eber, that actually talks about and shows that various Arabian populations have haplogroup E as well. So continuing the study, it says, although most of the data sets in our study define the deep ancestry of the phylogeny, they still shed some information on our interpretations of recent phenomena, such as the current genetic history of the E haplogroup and an implication to the origin and spread of Afroasiatic languages and to the history of pastoralism. Moreover, more comparative genetic analysis between the two sides of the Red Sea, specifically emphasizing on E-M123/E-M34 or E-M78 haplogroups, will not only redefine the root and exit of Homo sapiens sapiens from the from East Africa, but also the genealogies of Afro-Asiatic languages in the region. So, with all that being said, all of this fits what we see about the descendants of Joktan. They would have expanded from the Levant to southern Arabia. Joktanites lived along the Red Sea coast, Misha to Safar. The Semitic language took the same root. Haplogroup E was from the Levant and took the same root. Southern Arabians have haplogroup E. Southern Arabians also have Natufian and Levantine ancestry. Natufians are the ancestors of Semites. Furthermore, these Southern Arabian groups migrated into Ethiopia. And in Ethiopia, we find Semitic languages, haplogroup E, and oral histories, as well as archaeology, that prove that they descend from Southern Arabian peoples. As the scriptures say in Genesis chapter 10, verse 24 through 30, specifically reading verse 30, and their dwelling place was from Misha to Safar, and their dwelling place was from Misha as you go towards Safar, the mountain of the east. This is dealing with the descendants of Joktan. And then if you look at the branch of Semitic languages, beginning in the Levant, going into the Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa, same thing with haplogroup E, expanding and originating in the Levant, spreading into the Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa. Just visualizing this for you. And the fact that people on the western part of the Arabian Peninsula have the highest amount of Natufian ancestry when it comes to the F group, as you can see right here. They have high amounts of Natufian ancestry. And the Natufians, of course, are the ancestors of Semites. They also have very high amounts of haplogroup E. I'm just showing E-M123 as one example. There's other branches, but it is very high as well in the same region in Arabia, but also on the western shore of Arabia, where the Joktanites would have been. And showing this map, the Natufians have 40 to 100% of haplogroup E. Yemenites have up to 50% of haplogroup E. Here are the places where we get the samples from, and here's the amount. We have 50 to 25% of haplogroup E. Here's the study. And here are the various peoples who have been tested with E. So E is very much in Arabia. And here's just a map showing E-M123. High, very high in the Middle East, but you do see it within Ethiopia among these Ethiopian Semitic peoples. It's high in the Levant and the western shore of the western and southwestern Arabia, and also very, very much in Ethiopia, where you had Sabaeans settled. And so here's just showing sort of like a branch of everything. You have the Natufians being the ancestors of Semites who have 100%, and then the Yemenites have 50%, and then the people in modern day Levant, the Jordanians, have 31%, and then Yemenites, and depending on where you are, have 25%, and then Ethiopian, Amhara, and Jews have 23 to 13%. So you do see sort of like a trail from the highest amount being in the Levant going all the way down to Ethiopia. So you kind of can see genetically that spread where it's going to be highest to lowest. It's very interesting. And then, of course, dealing with languages, you can obviously see that with Proto-Semitic originating in the Levant, then going into Western Semitic, South Semitic, Old South Arabian, Ethiopian, Sabaean, and then North Ethiopian, South Ethiopian, Ge'ez, Eritrean, Amharic, and Goreg. And then again, showing you a map of the E-M123 haplogroup. You see it along the western and southwestern shore of Arabia, and then you see it in Ethiopia with the Ethio-Semitic people. Again, it's everything's pretty much matching perfectly. So in the future, I'll do a more in-depth and complete video on all the sons of Joktan, and I'll even come back to Sheba. I'll actually give a little bit deeper video on Sheba as well. But I believe Sheba is a good example for the rest of the sons of Joktan when I get to them. So a lot of the sons of Joktan would have remained in the Arabian Peninsula, of course, because we still see haplogroup E there today. but some of his sons will also went into the Horn of Africa. So I believe Sheba is a good example for the rest of Joktan's descendants. But this is why Joktan is a key figure to study. Like he is like the anchor point when it comes to understanding ancient Semites, understanding haplogroup E and its importance, with Eber and with Abraham, with many of Israel's ancient relatives. And so when it comes to Joktan and Joktanites, they are the indigenous Arabians and Bedouins, the most ancient of those groups. And technically, you know, they would be the ancient ethnic cousins to the Hebrews. And this makes this is why it's very important to study these people. And so remember, when it comes to the genealogy, here is Abraham, but here's the Israelites, and the Joktanites predate the Israelites by quite a few generations. Like they are one of the most ancient ethnic groups from the lineage of our Faxad that will be related to the Israelites. So that's why they're important to study. One of the most ancient cousins to the Israelite population, the Joktanites. But this is where we conclude the video. Sheba, son of Joktan. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, leave a comment for any information that you might want to share or any questions you might have. And for our next video, it is, what did Joktanites look like? We're going to go into phenotype and sort of go into, what did these ancient Joktanites look like? But make sure, again, share the video, subscribe, like, and have a great day. And don't forget to comment.